Well, it's the end of the week and time to look back at the top business stories we've been covering. Joining us again from Paris is our Editor-at-Large Craig Copetas. And in London is Diego Moya-Ocampos. He's the Principal Country Risk Analyst at IHS Markit, and he's the former Chief Secretary of Venezuela's Attorney General's office. So let's start in the UK, where British Prime Minister Theresa May surprised everybody on Tuesday when she called a snap election. MPs overwhelmingly backed May's plan, paving the way for a general election to be held on June the 8th. After the announcement, sterling soared to its highest level in more than 6 months. It jumped by over 2% against the US dollar. The stock market, however, was rattled by the news. The FTSE 100 suffered its worst day since the Brexit vote last year. Analysts say a victory for May would reduce much of the uncertainty surrounding Brexit, but a whole raft of new possibilities emerge if she loses. So, Craig, let's start with you. Now, you're in Paris, a big weekend in France for you, but how is the UK election playing out where you are?
Where I am, the UK is no longer a member of the European Union. We have a presidential election here right now, and that about the same time as the UK election, there'll be the national elections here when the French elect some 533 deputies to the National Assembly. It's not on anyone's radar.
Interesting comment this week from the European Parliament President Antonio Tajani. He said the UK would be welcomed back with open arms if voters change their minds about Brexit and vote in a government that wants to stay in the EU. Is this a subtle or not so subtle way of Brussels trying to influence voters in the UK?
Well, you know, when I heard that, Azar, my first reaction was, does this guy read the newspapers? This election that is taking place in the UK, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong here, you carry a British passport, I don't, has absolutely nothing to do with whether the United Kingdom makes a decision to go back and rejoin the EU. You know, game over. They're just figuring out how to split up the spoils of this divorce.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be a messy one, isn't it? Let's talk about the week's other big story for a moment now, and that's Venezuela. Around 250,000 anti-government protesters took to the streets of the capital, Caracas, in what they describe as the mother of all marches. The opposition wants President Nicolás Maduro to hold early elections and improve the country's struggling economy. Many Venezuelans have been suffering under severe shortages of medicine and food. Hyperinflation has wiped out people's salaries and the value of the country's currency, the bolivar. The IMF predicts inflation in Venezuela will skyrocket to more than 700%. So, Diego, you are from Venezuela. It must be quite a worrying time for you personally. It's among the worst cases of hyperinflation we've seen, right, anywhere. How are people that you know coping with what's going on over there?
Well, certainly it's a very worrying time. Most people are, at the moment, in the streets demanding the government to concede, to have elections, in order for people to vote and decide to change the direction of the economy and indeed to try to punish the government of Nicolás Maduro's economic mismanagement.
Diego, if you were in Venezuela right now and advising the government, what would that advice be?
Well, the first thing would be to be pragmatic, to ease foreign exchange, price controls, which are mainly the economic issues which have been generating these distortions, which have led to this dire state of the economy and this intensification of shortages of food and basic goods, which have reached a level which is simply unsustainable from an economic point of view. With the current levels of oil prices, simply this model of development where the revenues from state-owned oil company PDVSA being used to fund just imports, and this wave of expropriation, which had affected basically almost every sector of the economy, simply makes no sense whatsoever. It's either a radical change of the direction of the economy, easing price controls, easing foreign exchange controls, and opening up the economy creating confidence to attract new investment in the country, and being serious to increase oil production, or otherwise simply there's no way things could improve.
Right. Craig, let me bring you back in on this. Now, this week we also saw the government of Venezuela seizing General Motors manufacturing plant, once one of the biggest car plants in Latin America. Can a country in this position ever regain the confidence of foreign investors?
Here's the autopsy. Venezuela is right now a failed state. It would take a tectonic political shift down there to generate the velocity of direct foreign investment required to reanimate the country. I mean, if Venezuela were a very rich country with a lot of great assets, both natural resources and human resources, if Venezuela was a company, it would be ripe for a corporate takeover right now. And I really cannot see in the current global economic climate anyone wanting to invest serious folding money in Venezuela until there is a sea change in the attitude of that government and someone emerges who can actually manage the place properly. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, indeed it is, Craig. Diego, let me bring you back in. You know, Craig mentioned natural resources there. Venezuela is one of the world's biggest oil producers, in fact, not necessarily exporters, but certainly one of the biggest. Is it suffering from the curse of oil, do you think?
Yeah, certainly. It's a combination of factors. Certainly corruption and economic mismanagement during this administration has created a condition for this tragedy, as Craig was very rightly describing the situation. We have to remember that when Chavez came to power in 1999, Venezuela was producing 3.4 million barrels a day. Just in 2015, Venezuela was producing 2.4 million barrels a day. At the moment, oil production is declining towards 1.9 million barrels a day and continues going down. Venezuela is attractive for investment because it holds the world's proven largest oil reserves.
Right, indeed. Craig, go ahead.
There's something important. There's something important there. Venezuela's oil is a very heavy crude oil, which costs a lot of money to refine. It's not sweet crude like what you find in the Nigerian fields or elsewhere. It's a crude oil that, in most cases, is used to make asphalt. And the cost of converting that to gasoline and diesel is very high. So the country is being hit with a double whammy. One, the drop in oil prices, and two, the cost of converting that energy into diesel or gasoline fuel.
Well, that's an interesting insight there. Stay with us for a second. That was the week that was. Let's go around again and find out what's on your radars for next week. Diego, let me start with you.
For next week, well, we're seeing again, the minister of the central bank in Venezuela is not making public inflation statistics. So the National Assembly, through the Commission of Finance, is starting to publish data. So we're going to start seeing some numbers coming out. When it comes to Peru, following the phenomenon of El Niño, which led to heavy rains and landslide and massive infrastructure damage along the coast, we're going to see the government announcing more or less the cost of reconstruction. As our sources indicate, it's going to stand around 2.6 billion. Now, despite the fact that this is going to be allocated for reconstruction, in a certain way, it's good news for the government. A key component of this government, of Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, former chief economist of the World Bank, project is to allocate funding for social economic...
Diego, I'm just going to have to stop you for a second there because we're running short on time. Craig, let me turn to you. On your radar, France, I presume?
French elections, who's going to win? Then we take a hard, deep dive into their economic policies. I'll give you a hint. Macron versus François Fillon. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
And a couple of things that we're watching next week. It's Donald Trump's 100th day in office on Friday, believe it or not. Doesn't time fly when the world's most powerful nation is having fun? And I'm particularly excited about the Istanbul Auto Show. We've had a preview of that today from Mobeen, but we are at the show itself next week from Friday. So stay tuned for that.